Good evening, my friend. Tonight, there is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve, and nothing waiting for you except a peaceful journey through a quiet forest. So, settle into your favorite blanket. Take one slow breath in, and let it drift away. Outside, gentle rain falls against the windows, and somewhere far beyond the trees, a lonely owl welcomes the night. Our story begins on the final evening that an old cabin will ever have a visitor. The narrow road curled through the pine forest like a sleepy ribbon. Rain tapped softly against the windshield of an aging pickup truck as Ethan Harper drove deeper into the woods than he had in years. The forest hadn't changed. Tall pines still leaned over the road. Wild ferns covered the ground. Tiny streams crossed beneath weathered wooden bridges. Every mile felt quieter than the last. Ethan smiled. He had promised himself he wouldn't come back. Yet somehow, here he was. Whispering Pine's cabin waited another 6 miles ahead. The cabin had belonged to his grandfather for almost 50 years. It wasn't a famous place. It wasn't luxurious. There was no electricity powerful enough for modern comforts. No television. Almost no phone signal. Just a fireplace. An old rocking chair. A tiny kitchen. And the endless sound of the forest. Tomorrow morning the property would officially belong to another family. Tonight was the cabin's last night with someone who knew every corner of it. Rain became softer as Ethan crossed the final wooden bridge. The headlights found a familiar wooden sign. Whispering Pine's cabin. The paint had almost disappeared beneath years of snow and sunshine. He parked beside the porch. For a moment, he simply listened. Rain. Wind. Pine branches brushing together. Nothing else. No engines. No voices. Only nature breathing slowly beneath the evening sky. He stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards greeted him with gentle creaks. The old brass key still rested exactly where his grandfather used to hide it. Inside a small birdhouse beside the door. Ethan laughed quietly. Some things never change. The lock turned easily. The heavy wooden door opened with a long familiar sigh. Warm memories seemed to drift out before the air itself. The scent of cedar wood. Old books. Fireplace ash. Fresh rain carried by the breeze. Dust floated lazily through fading golden light. Everything remained almost exactly as it had been years ago. The plaid blanket still covered the sofa. Copper pans still hung above the tiny stove. An old clock ticked patiently on the wall. Even the rocking chair faced the fireplace as though someone had only stepped outside for a moment. Ethan placed his backpack on the table. He wasn't here to pack everything. Most of the furniture had already been sold with the cabin. He had only come for one reason: to spend one final peaceful night. Outside, rain slowly grew steadier. Inside, silence wrapped around every room like a soft blanket. He collected dry firewood from the porch. Soon tiny orange flames danced inside the stone fireplace. The room glowed with gentle amber light. Shadows stretched lazily across the wooden walls. The cabin felt alive again. Not haunted. Not mysterious in a frightening way. Simply awake. As though it had been waiting. Ethan filled an old kettle with spring water. Minutes later, gentle steam curled into the air. He poured hot tea into his grandfather's favorite blue mug. The same mug with a tiny chip near its handle. He remembered dropping it when he was only 9 years old. His grandfather had laughed. A cracked cup tells better stories than a perfect one. Ethan smiled at the memory. Some lessons stayed with us longer than we realize. The rain became softer. Night quietly settled over the forest. Somewhere outside, a wind chime made from tiny glass bottles began to sing. Not loudly. Only enough to remind anyone listening that the breeze was still awake. Ethan walked slowly through every room. The tiny bedroom. The reading corner beside the window. The small attic ladder. Everything felt smaller than he remembered. Perhaps cabins never shrink. Perhaps memories simply grow larger. Near the bookshelf he noticed something unusual. A leather journal rested beneath an old lantern. He didn't remember seeing it before. Its cover carried no title. Only a small pine tree pressed into the worn leather. He brushed away a thin layer of dust. Inside the first page, only one sentence had been written. Every traveler leaves a little piece behind. No signature. No date. Only those quiet words. Ethan sat beside the fire. Outside, the rain continued its gentle song. Inside, he turned the first page of the journal. And without realizing it, his final evening at Whispering Pines cabin had just begun. Agla response me main part 1 bidunga. Joisi sin shabina kisi break ki continue hoga aya part 1 ko aj badhayaga. The first page turned with the soft whisper of old paper. The handwriting was careful and steady, as though every word had been written slowly beside a warm fire. October 14th. Tonight the rain arrived before sunset. I watched the clouds settle over the hills until the whole forest disappeared beneath a silver curtain. It reminded me that some of the most beautiful places are the ones we cannot fully see. Ethan paused. The words felt strangely familiar. Not because he had read them before, but because they sounded exactly like something his grandfather would have said. The fire crackled gently. Outside, the rain never hurried. It simply continued its patient rhythm against the roof. He turned another page. Each entry belonged to a different visitor. A school teacher. A retired fisherman. A young couple celebrating their first anniversary. A woman who had spent an entire winter learning to paint birds. None of them spoke about sadness. None of them described fear. Instead, every page held a small memory. The smell of fresh pine after rain. The sound of snow falling at midnight. The first robin of spring singing outside the bedroom window. It was less a journal, and more a collection of peaceful moments. Ethan smiled without realizing it. Perhaps that was why his grandfather had never thrown it away. It reminded people that ordinary evenings often become the ones we remember forever. The cabin grew warmer. His tea had cooled just enough to drink. He carried the blue mug toward the window. Beyond the glass, the forest had disappeared into gentle mist. Only the nearest pine trees remained visible. Their branches swayed slowly as though whispering secrets only the wind could understand. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed somewhere inside the cabin. Not on the front door. Not on a window. Just 3 gentle taps. Tock, tock, tock. Ethan stood quietly. He listened. Nothing. Only the fire. Only the rain. He laughed softly. Old wood, he whispered. This place has always talked. His grandfather used to say that every cabin had its own language. Floors sighed. Walls settled. Roofs stretched after warm afternoons. If you listened long enough, you could almost believe the house was breathing. The mysterious sound faded into silence. Ethan returned to the rocking chair. The chair moved slowly back and forth with a comforting creak. It felt as though time itself had slowed down. Another page caught his attention. This one contained only a short note. If you find the lantern in the attic, light it only after sunset. Not because anything frightening will happen, but because the cabin tells its best stories after dark. There was no explanation. Only those words. Ethan looked toward the small attic ladder above the hallway. He remembered climbing there as a child. Old fishing rods. Blankets. Boxes filled with postcards. His grandfather's telescope. Nothing unusual. Still, curiosity quietly invited him upstairs. He picked up the lantern from the shelf. Its brass handle had darkened with age. The glass remained perfectly clear. A tiny bottle of lamp oil rested beside it. Someone had carefully filled it before leaving. Well, Ethan whispered with a smile. I suppose one last adventure won't hurt. He climbed the narrow wooden ladder. Each step answered with a gentle creak. The attic smelled of cedar, dried herbs, and old books. Moonlight slipped through a tiny round window, painting silver circles across the floorboards. Dust floated peacefully in the cool air. Nothing had changed. The telescope still stood beside the window. A quilt folded neatly in one corner. An old wooden chest rested beneath the beams. Ethan knelt beside it. Inside were dozens of postcards from visitors who had stayed at Whispering Pines over the years. One card came from Oregon. Another from Maine. A family from Texas had written, "Thank you for reminding us that silence can be beautiful." Another simply read, "We'll return someday." Ethan wondered how many people had meant those words. And how many never found the chance. He closed the chest gently. As he turned toward the ladder, his eyes caught something resting on the windowsill. A tiny brass compass. It belonged to his grandfather. He picked it up carefully. The needle spun for a moment, before settling perfectly north. Tucked beneath the compass was a folded piece of paper. Its edges had yellowed with time. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. For the final visitor only. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. Tomorrow, the cabin would belong to someone else. Tonight, he was the final visitor. He carried the letter downstairs, placing it carefully beside the fire. Outside, the rain continued to fall through the quiet forest. The fire glowed warmly. The old clock ticked toward midnight. And for the first time that evening, Ethan wondered what message had been waiting all these years. Just for him. Agla response me part 1 si hoga, jahan Ethan us letter ko kolaga iya kaban ka sabse pyara, cozy mystery dear sam ana shuru hoga. Ethan placed the folded letter on the small wooden table beside the fire. Instead of opening it immediately, he noticed something unusual. The envelope felt heavier than a single sheet of paper. Carefully, he slid his fingers inside. Along with the letter, a second piece of parchment slipped onto the table. It wasn't a letter. It was a hand-drawn map. The paper was faded. The ink had almost disappeared. Yet one detail stood out clearly. A small red circle had been drawn deep inside the forest. Beside it were only 4 handwritten words. Where the pines whisper. Ethan frowned. He knew these woods better than almost anyone. Yet he had never heard of such a place. He unfolded the actual letter. Only 2 short sentences were written inside. Some stories cannot be told inside these walls. At sunrise, follow the map. Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. Only silence. The fire crackled softly behind him. The rain had nearly stopped. Curiosity filled the quiet cabin. Ethan walked to the window. Moonlight now filtered through the clouds, illuminating the forest in silver. For just a moment, he thought he saw a faint lantern glowing far among the trees. A tiny golden light, Perfectly still. He blinked. The light disappeared. Perhaps it had only been moonlight reflecting through the rain. Or perhaps someone else knew about the map. Ethan smiled to himself. There will be time tomorrow. He carefully folded the map and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The letter returned to the journal. Outside, the wind drifted gently through the tall pines. It almost sounded like distant voices. Not speaking words, but humming a peaceful melody carried by the forest itself. The old grandfather clock chimed midnight. 1, 2, 3, until 12 soft chimes echoed through the cabin. Ethan added another log to the fire. Warm amber light danced across the walls. The rocking chair moved ever so slightly, though no one was sitting in it. He wasn't frightened. Instead, it felt like the cabin itself was wishing him good night. He wrapped himself in the old plaid blanket and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would follow the mysterious map. But tonight, the rain, the fire, and the whispering pines would gently carry him into sleep. End of part 1. Is ending shave viewers ki man mi ek sawal ray jatahai. Map kis jaga la jaega. Aya wahi part 2 ka huk banega.